If you look in the mirror and you say, you're not getting on with your life in this world and everything you can do, and you're betraying yourself because you're afraid, you better do better than that. You understand? It's just not good enough. And in the New Age, we've made it good enough, and it's not. We've spoiled ourselves. We've let ourselves off the hook, a bad childhood and a little fear, and that's all it takes. Oh, well, you don't have to try so hard. They had a bad childhood and they're afraid. Oh, well. It's not enough. It's not a good enough reason anymore, guys. It's made us weak, spineless. It has not made this a stronger people. It's made it a weak, self-indulged culture. It has not made the New Age a powerful army of transformational people. Not at all. It's made them complacent, victims, but it hasn't made them strong. And when they look for their highest potential, they're afraid of their lowest. When they think about going toward God, they run the other way, because what if God humiliates me? What if I'm humiliated? So, what if you are? You'll survive. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, I'm going to describe stages. Everyone and everything goes through these 5 stages. Everyone and everything. Even your relationships go through. Everything in the whole wide universe goes through these 5 stages. You can chart a relationship. You can chart a dynamic with your children. Your children will get stuck in these 5 relationships. You could decide exactly where you are with one of your kids by these 5 relationships, exactly where they are and where they will go next, if you know these 5 stages, because they are the 5 stages of the transformation of consciousness. And it's like dropping in a tablet of, how do I say it? Let me think. Dropping in a seed of transformation and waiting for it to dissolve. And you will go through these 5 stages. And it's like looking at your child, and you can tell the seed just hit. And your child will go through these 5 stages. It is impossible for him not to. And if you know these, you could say that's exactly where he is. He has to go through this next stage. It's a matter of timing. And I'm going to describe them. And I will describe them on the micro and on the macro, so you can see how what is in one is in the whole, because that is the way life is. The first stage, isn't this silly? This is the best they can do, but it is silly. I love Finhorn. This is my only complaint. You have to admit. All right, that's it. Okay, now, the shift in consciousness of which we are a part. If one said, when did this begin? Is there a way you can chart the beginning? Then I would pose that it began the day the first nuclear bomb was dropped. Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. In that moment, we entered a new age of consciousness. In that moment. In that moment, we entered into a quantum age of thinking. We entered into what is indeed the age of the soul, the age of energy, the age of psychic territory in that era. Now, it's as if heaven wanted to balance that. So just as it's as if we were always meant to crack the atom open, we were always meant to get into the quantum tiny thought process and learn about the new paradigm of thought into form. The question facing us was, which way were we going to do that, and who would we be at the moment of entry into this new domain of thought? Would we go through the door of fate, or would we go through the door of destiny? Because we went into this new thought, armed with the intention of killing, we went through the door of fate. Are you following me? That set certain dynamics in motion, one of which was you. Because the moment a new idea, a new inspiration was taken and grabbed and turned into a weapon, became always heaven will balance. Light poured through, and a new idea came in called the age of consciousness. And boom, came down on the other side and grabbed an entire new culture was born. A powerful shaft of light came down. And the keystone idea of that era was what? You create your own reality. A complete counter thought to the nuclear age. A balancing perception of equal power that says you do not have to be subject to any evil dynamic anymore. You create, you choose. What was actually born, people, was a higher level of choice was given, born for the first time in the era of humanity. How that incarnated then came like this. And this is what always happens in a relationship between parent and child, you and someone else, you and a coworker. Here's the dynamic. Which is why I think parents, if you have teenage kids, maybe you could appreciate this as I describe it, because raising kids is all about watching them cycle through one orbit of choice to the next orbit of choice, to the next orbit of choice, and always they will go through this cycle. The first thing that happened when God's dropped in, that perception that you create your own reality, is that it blew apart everything that restricted reality. Whenever a new thought, a new power tool, a new perception comes into someone's head, comes into your child's head, the first thing they're going to do with that is they're going into a revolution. They have to revolt. They have got to have a revolution. So in the 1960s, we had a revolution. We had a huge social, psychic revolution on the planet where the, quote, New Age was born. And we took apart all kinds of thought forms and restrictions that held people together up until that time. Any kind of traditional thought was taken apart, was dismantled. Now, what you have to understand that was so important about that time was up until that time, it would have been very difficult for you to pursue, quote, destiny, because so much of your life would have already been chosen for you. So the significance about this time was that a whole realm of choice was being born. And always, as with everybody, imagine you in a relationship where you're trying to introduce choice. Imagine a parent and a child, and all of a sudden the child's at an age where he wants to revolt, and he wants more power. And you say and the first thing you do is you go into a revolution. But always with a revolution, if you'll notice, when you are in that's it, I'm not doing this anymore, and if someone says, well, what do you want? The first thing you would do is say, I'm not sure, I just know what I don't want. Agreed? So always with the revolution, the first stage is to push out what you know you don't want, although you don't know what you do want. And that is very, very important, because the same thing is true with fate and destiny. You may say, I've got to know what my destiny is. Well, but maybe the first stage is to know what it isn't. Okay? The revolt, to know what it isn't. So in the 1960s, the whole journey was about pushing out and revolting against anything that held restrictions, just like with a child, just like with a teenager. I don't want to be home at this hour anymore. I don't want this. Revolt, revolt, revolt. And yet they couldn't tell you what they really wanted. Look at society. The next thing that happened was the 1970s. So after the revolution, and women got rights, and in my country, the African American got the right to vote, and women got the right to this, and they had the Roe versus Wade, and they had the right to abortion, and all of a sudden the restrictions, and all of a sudden Eastern religions were over in the West, and West was over in the East, and it was just like a potpourri. We could study, you could meditate on an altar, you could do whatever you wanted to. Anything was fine. All of a sudden, you got whatever you wanted. All your revolution was over with, and if someone said, now what do you want? You'd have to say, I got to go think about it. So from the revolt, the revolution, you had to do an involution. So the 70s, society went inward. There was no more revolution. The same thing with a relationship. Once it goes into a revolution, the same thing with teenagers. Once they have their revolution, then they got to go think about it. Go to your room. Go to your room and think about it. What do you want? I'm going to go think about it. They go and they involute. You involute. Then they come out after the involution, and this is where you, once you go into I got to get out of here, I can't do this anymore, I can't do that anymore, you battle with your fate. That's it, I can't do this anymore. Your first battle is with your fate, with what you simply can't take anymore, what you know you don't want anymore. You just know it. I may not know what I do want, but I do know what I don't want. Fair enough? That much you can identify. Then you get to the next level, which is now that you've tossed out everything you don't want and sort of like, what is the expression? Cleaned your closet out and cleaned out the drawers. Then you would sit there and think, okay, now that that's done, I have to think about it. The involute stage. During that stage, it's a very powerful, very vulnerable stage, because you're really not sure. But what you do know during this stage, just like the 1980s, in 1970s, when our society at home, and then eventually in Europe, pulled in, people began to redesign themselves very strongly, and these wild, crazy hippies in the street began to metamorph into conservative middle-class people. Instead of smoking their marijuana in the street, they shoved it in their drawers. I remember seeing a commercial. It was hilarious. Here are two hippies, and they have, do you know what a Harley Davidson is? Do they have those here? Here's this guy, this Harley man, he's big. And he's got chains on and this Harley patch and tattoos. And there's his wife looking like some kind of patchwork quilt from the hippie era. And they're talking to their child, but you don't see the child on camera. And the two of them are talking to their child and they're saying, how could you do this to us? We gave you the best years of our lives. Look at you. How could you do this? And then you hear the child talking to them, and the child says, I have to follow my own path. I have to follow my own heart. And the father says, I just can't even bear to look at you. Then the camera flashes, the kid's in a three-piece suit. And then the wife looks at their husband, these two middle-aged, dumpy, hippie, Harley Davidson creatures, and the one says, this is your fault. Oh, God. Your next stage, the involution. During this stage, the vulnerable time is that you start going on from organic divinity, which I'll explain in much greater detail tomorrow. Your instincts begin to mature. And you start going from a sense of organic divinity, God in your tissue, to waking up and beginning to come to terms with a sense of how conscious do I want my relationship to be with God? How conscious do you want it to be? How conscious do you want it to be? Do you want to play dumb with God or not? Because in that time, you begin to discover your interior life, not through a mystical awakening. You're not there yet. You couldn't handle it. But you begin to discover your interior life by discovering what you don't want, beginning with your interior sense of self and wounds and power. And in the midst of that, you find the seeds of your empowerment. In the midst of that, you begin to find and discover the seeds of who you could be, maybe, just might, if you really let yourself go. If you really had courage, if you really followed something much greater than the commands of another person. Or if you yourself cease to be a controlling person, where you yourself were and your dark side, where you yourself cease to be a critical, controlling force, needing to dominate others in order to get your way. You see, how many people are in therapy because of you? Duh. How many? Oh no, it's only you. You cease to realize you are also very capable of serious injuries. And you have to look at something that we are going to look at very deeply tomorrow, which is, do you want to give up your power to wound? Do you? You'd be surprised how difficult it is to give up permission, power, to wound another human being. You may not want to give that up. It may just be asking too much. Because when you follow a higher path, you have got to start turning certain things aside, like your relationship to chaos. And the fact is, you've got to admit, I love creating chaos. And this is my style. This is how I do it, this is when I do it, this is why I do it, and I'm not giving it up. Because it is a form of power. And I love that power. And I'm not giving it up. And I love wounding others. This is how I do it, this is when I do it, this is why I do it. And I'm not giving it up. I punish them through silence. I pout. I manipulate, and I'm damn good at it. Don't kid yourselves, my little conscious friends. You want your destiny? It costs big time. It isn't about figuring out a prayer to make God come to your door and say, here you go. Here's the keys to your new car. It is not about that. Never has it been. Where have you ever seen such a fantasy? It has never been. Let me tell you something. The higher the destiny, the more the anguish. The higher the destiny, the more difficult the life. Not because of all these crazy stories of saints who burned themselves at a stake and turned upside down and suffered like crazy holy anorexics. Not because of that. but because being conscious is not easy. It is not easy to be conscious in a world that isn't very conscious. It is not pain, personal pain, where God makes you suffer because I'm going to show you how much I love you. Get on that cross. It isn't that kind of suffering. It is the kind of suffering that comes from saying, let me show you a vision. Look how the world could be if they understood each other. And now you have to descend and live in a world where you know what could be if people would choose otherwise. And you have to hold in your heart. What if, here is the most revealing thing, and it happened last time I was in London doing a workshop, and I was talking about, I guess the ideas for this book were getting formed in my soul. And I said, consciousness is painful at times. We'll get to the good part about it, but it's painful at times, many, many times, because it is so difficult to have an idea, a perception in your head, like, here's a truth. It is a command to be forgiving, period. How many of you have heard that? How many of you heard that it's that absolutely nothing to do with forgiveness? That vengeance is totally okay? Do your hands work? All right, respond to me, because what you're doing is you're sitting on your hands so that heaven doesn't see you. And if you don't answer, heaven won't hold you accountable. You can't fool me. I'm too good at this. We're going to do this again. How many of you have any allegiance, know anything at all about forgiveness as a higher spiritual principle? Anybody? Okay. Now, you don't have any connection to forgiveness as a spiritual principle? Yes, no, maybe? No. You would say no. So forgiveness means nothing to you. Which leaves, the only option is vengeance.
No, it's too high a challenge.
Perfect. That's perfect. You did it. Too high a challenge. That's it. Thank you. Well done, you. That is exactly perfect as an answer. That's too high for me. I don't want it. I'm not going there. That's too conscious. It's too hard to live at that altitude. Are you following what I'm saying to you? It's too hard to be forgiving all the time. I don't want to live at that altitude. I can't do it. I can't live that conscious a life. It's too hard. Don't ask me to do it. I don't want to live there. How about, here's another one, don't judge, because you don't know what that is. How many of you have heard it? How many of you can live there full time? No. As one wonderfully, wonderfully honest man said, I need to judge. It makes me feel good. I've got to be superior to at least 3 people a day. Is that brilliant? Is that brilliant? I loved his honesty. I loved his honesty. Other people wouldn't admit it, but they feel the same way. This man admitted what a lot of other people wouldn't admit, which is, I've got to feel superior to other people. And so I judge, and it makes me feel superior, and I'm not ready not to judge. Period. Done. I can't live at that altitude yet. So when I say to you that consciousness is painful, it's not because God's going to say, boy, am I going to burn you at the stake. It's because knowing or seeing that altitude and having to live that altitude when no one else is up there hurts. It hurts. It's very painful. Not that I live up there. Let's be really clear here. Let's be really clear here. I go up there, I take notes, I come down. I don't want to live up there, but I know how to get there. But you see my point. In this second stage, in this stage of involution, what happens is that you get a real sense that it's time for you to start choosing from within, and that the choices you start making from within are going to have a very profound impact on what happens to you in your life. This is a very, very powerful time in your life, because you start realizing if, for example, you decide to start healing, to start pursuing what happened to you to made you the way you are, that's going to change your life. If you decide to take a look at what do I want, I think maybe I want to study spirituality or take up yoga or whatever it is. Or maybe I just want to go do this seminar on mysticism. That's going to start changing your life. These things are tools of empowerment. Tools of empowerment. Okay, you don't realize it at the time. Now watch the next. The 70s was the involution. The 80s, once you decide what it is, even make one choice, see if you relate to this. As soon as you make one choice to do one thing that changes you in the least bit, and by change I mean that improves you, or even hints of a fragrance of empowerment, you bring the devil to your door. Everyone, someone, 1, 3, who knows, will come up and start challenging you. What are you doing that for? They'll start criticizing. What are you reading this for? What are you studying this for? What are you going there for? Finhorn, it's a halfway house for the psychically afflicted. What are you going there for? Absolutely. They will absolutely go after you. Because nobody was born to support your empowerment. If they think that your empowerment will threaten their security, it's just not going to happen. So the third phase, just like it was in the 1980s in the world, in the Western world, is narcissism. You have to become very narcissistic. Can you believe I'm saying that? But it's true. You have to become very narcissistic to withstand the first stage of your own transformation. So when someone comes up to you and says, what are you studying that? Or why are you suddenly doing yoga? Or why are you suddenly a vegetarian? Or why are you suddenly doing this? You have got to be able to withstand the transformation of once needing their approval to withdrawing. And the only way to do that is to become get that shell, to go through that shell of building detachment. And the first phase of it is very, very defensive. You go through the defensive stage, you go through the anger stage, you go through the stage of, you're supposed to support me. Why? No one's supposed to support you. Why are they supposed to support you? Well, it'd be nice if you did. It would be, but Anne, nobody's supposed to. Snap out of it. Okay? If you knew anything about human consciousness, you would know better than to expect it. It's your naivete. Get your head out of the sand. Okay? But at the end of the narcissistic stage, when you've got your bearings and you've got your belly full of self-esteem, even partially, in the 1980s, by this time, the New Age, all those hippies, had become computer corporate people. Dell, Microsoft, They became complete capitalists. They put away their hookah pipes, did their cocaine offshore. Okay? And the 1980s became a decade of outrageous profit-making numbers. Huge. It was a decade of outrageous narcissism. And suddenly values went into what? Like how much money can you earn, how fast? How fast? And horrible phrases like multitask were born. Can you multitask? And what's worse is, it became admirable. Yeah, I can multitask. Look at her, looking good. It suddenly became admirable. What are you doing? I'm moving this. I got a dish on my head. How unbelievably stupid. And we admire this. I admire, what are you doing? I'm multitasking. How many can you do? And I got my chair on wheels and I'm doing, to admire this became the height of stupidity. But we did. Not only that, in the 80s, as we got more narcissistic with ourselves, we started to tamper with something at the psychic level. And what was that? We started to tamper with speed. I don't mean drug speed. I mean the relationship of time and space and psychic force and speed. We started to make speed a primary value. Now, watch this. At the mystical level, the mystical experience is a kairos experience. It is the experience of timelessness, of being transcendent of time at all, of being without time, once upon a time, the transcendent nature. The experience of the internet is the experience of becoming timeless. But it's technical timelessness. How fast can we go? Faster, 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 faster. Fast information, timeless information. Get this here faster. Our physical world is becoming a timeless world. We are withdrawing time from the physical world. And literally, those ordinary mortals who are tampering with the goods of time and space have no idea what they're doing psychically. In the meantime, psychic disorders are just skyrocketing. ADD and Alzheimer's, and they are absolutely skyrocketing. And autism and all the psychic disorders that absolutely are filling the orbits because the psychic waves are so overwhelming, are so incredibly overwhelming. And all of that, not to mention the fact that people are unbelievably losing their ability to focus. What did you say? What did you say? What did you say? Completely losing the, and then to add to that, there is an unbelievable absence of the sacred. As we speak about Easter, on the eve of Easter, we need to pause and talk about what is the sacred? What is the sacred? In these last decades, we have created a hybrid spirituality, but that doesn't mean we've gone anywhere near the sacred, because we haven't. We haven't at all. As a matter of fact, we've pulled away from it. We have completely pulled away from it. Anytime someone says, I need to go hug a tree for a spiritual experience, they are very distant from the sacred. They are walking on leaves. They are indeed engaging in a pagan dynamic, and by pagan I mean it with every ounce of respect. That is pagan divinity. That is organic divinity. But it is not a conscious engagement of the sacred in the same way as a mystical transformation, as a mystical experience in which the divine enters the walls of your soul. It is a safe mystical experience in which you, the hugger, controls the entire experience, leaving it in your hands, because the very thought of being overwhelmed by light, consumed by the fire, is much too much. You couldn't bear it. You could not bear it, because who would you be afterwards, and would you even be able to function on this earth if, in fact, a sacred force swept you away and gave you an experience unlike anything you've ever heard? Rerouted your coordinates, would you have to run to someone and say, would you validate this for me? Would you please validate this for me? Or would your soul have the stamina to know for a fact that you know exactly what you experienced? And you know exactly what to do. You know exactly what to pray, and you know exactly how to follow it. Which would you do? And if someone said to you, don't be ridiculous, you're crazy, would you actually be afraid you were? Or would you have the stamina to know, I'm not crazy, I know exactly what happened to me. I know exactly what I heard, and I know exactly what the source of it was. Thank you very much, and here's your boundary. Done. Or are you strong enough of soul, not spirit, of soul, to have that sort of encounter with what Teresa of Avila would call quietude? To have it rush into the walls of your soul, have the divine say, be still and know that I am with you. Now listen to me. And you are swept into this and receive an order. You open your eyes, the world remains the same, but you are not the same within the world. And then you see the world in such a way that you see the divine in the glistening leaves, and you know how alive that tree is. You know how alive this earth is. You see the divine in everything, not through your imagination, but because God put you in that tree for 1 second. Not through your imagination, but through the power of some mystical force where you were taken out of your body, put in that tree, and then put back while you were sitting there writing a book. Now write about that. And then you think to yourself, I'll do my best. I'm not sure I can capture it, but I will do my best. And you know for a fact, not an earth fact, but a mystical fact, that not one stone lacks breath. Not one stone. It is all a breathing instrument. And if God calls you, you shouldn't turn a deaf ear. You should run. Run. Drop everything and say, thank God I've been waiting for you to call. Thank God. In that era of narcissism, you toughen up your gut and you think, my God, I've actually worried what that person was going to say. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? And if you get the most absurd command, take it. We'll talk about all of this tomorrow and strategies for every ounce of it. Strategies for the most absurd life. But after the narcissism comes the next, which should have been in the 1990s, the decade of evolution. Once you develop that sense of self-esteem, you must evolve out of narcissism and move into the evolution of who you are after that. You have to evolve past it. The culture hasn't done that, and the world hasn't done that. Just as an aside, my own beloved nation hasn't done that, which is why it is so stuck in a horrid narcissistic place. It should have evolved. But in what happened to humanity is humanity hasn't evolved out of the narcissistic phase. What's in it for me? 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 Narcissism is also the prevalent voice of those who are in healing. If I heal, what do I do then? What do I do then? If I'm not a victim, what will I be? The narcissistic phase of your evolution is the most comfortable phase, where everything's about you. Everything's about you. No matter what, it's all about you. From the worst of it to the best of it, it's all about you. I'm not understood. A narcissistic plea. A narcissist plea. Everything's about you. It's very difficult to decide you're not going to be a narcissist anymore. The commercials on TV are about narcissism. Did you ever think that you, everything is about you? There is nothing in this hybrid spirituality that focuses on others taking care of others. If there's a disaster, a Katrina, a tsunami, then we gather and we take care of others. But then it's over with, and we go back to ourselves. And we brag about what we did for others. Then we get our little braggadocious time. But on our own, here's a question. Well, before I ask you a question, I want to tell you about this woman who was Christmas Day. It was a few years ago, and she's in Cincinnati. And her children were gone with her husband, and she had nothing to do. And I'm not specializing in stories about Catholics, by the way. It's just that this happened to be another one, and I have lots of stories about other people. But it seems like this is the one that occurs to me. So this woman, on this particular Christmas, she's all by herself, and she's a writer, and she walks into this church. And so as she's in the church, she hadn't been to church in years and years and years, like 20 years. But it was just one of those things, fate to destiny. Now, your decision. God gives you a cue to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do. It's right out of the clear blue. You wouldn't ordinarily do it. It's completely out of the clear blue. How many of you would be inclined to dismiss that? Because it's so easy to say, God, I'm not going to do that. Or how many of you would think, this is so out of the clear blue, it has got to be. Okay? Well, she just went to church. She wasn't sitting there thinking, I bet this is God. She wasn't doing anything silly like that. She just went into the church. She had nothing else to do. She was lonely. It was Christmas. She goes in, and it was one of those churches. It was old. It was sort of like falling apart sort of thing. And it was filled with 20 or 25 people, but they were like God's odds and ends. They were just odds and ends. And she chose a pew on the side, and you know in the services that like in the before they have the what do they call that? Consecration. They have ordinary mortals bring up the bread and the wine for that. Someone called her into it. And she says, oh, I can't do this. I'm just sitting here, no, I can't do this. And I don't even know what to do. And this person said, there's nothing to it. Just take this up to the altar. She's a nervous wreck over this. She gets this, and the priest, of course, who knows all his oddballs, sees her coming up, and he starts laughing when she gets up to the altar, and he says, I bet you're surprised. And he's laughing. She can't get over there's a priest who laughs, so now her head's spinning. All of a sudden, she's part of this, and she's with these oddballs. The priest is laughing. She can't get over it. She was so stunned. She doesn't go to communion because she figures, I can't go to communion. It's been 20 years. I have no right to do this. Oh, no. This is where I'm not. No. But she was so overwhelmed by this, she went back the next Sunday. But she's really not going to Mass, you understand. She's just going back there to see the oddballs again and see this whole thing. Well, while she's there the next Sunday, because now it's like New Year's Eve, she notices that before the priest gives anybody communion, he goes to a door, little wooden door on the side, opens it up, and there are nuns in full habit who he leans, you can't see them. He presents the host through the window, and they take the host. And she's looking, and she just, who are they, and what is that? And so she realizes there's got to be cloistered nuns. Here in Cincinnati, that's not possible. Now she is so intrigued. Not only are these oddballs in the church and this friendly priest, but now there's an attachment of cloistered nuns. Now she figures, I've got to talk to this priest. All of this because she listened to a voice that said, go to the church. Fate to destiny. So she finally gets her hold of this priest. And she says, I've got to come talk to you. And he says, well, come on to the rectory after church, and it's fine. So she goes, and she doesn't know it, but he's not just a priest, he's a Franciscan. So when she comes to the rectory, he had put on the robe. Do you know the Franciscan robe? Friar tuck? Right, the hood, the rope, right? They're sexy. No, they are. They're really looking good. So I love the Franciscan robe. I love it. So better than the Trappist. But anyway. So she can't get, now it's a Franciscan, and she's looking at him, and she can't go. So she says, who are they? And he says, well, they are poor Clares. I'm a Franciscan, and Clare of Assisi was Francis of Assisi's counterpart. So those are poor Clares, and they are cloistered, just like Clare of Assisi was. What do you mean they're cloistered? I mean they've never left the building. What do you mean they've never left the building? I mean they've never left the building. How long? Well, they've been in there for about 120 years. No way. Yes. Now there are nuns in there who have never left the building for 65 years. No way. Yes. So I need to talk to them. Not likely. I need to get in there. Never. Why not? They're cloister. I need to see them. Not likely. Well, can I interview them? They're busy. Bingo! She says, how can they be busy? They don't go anywhere. She says to him, they're locked up in a building. They don't go anywhere. She says, I have a husband. I have 2 kids. I've got a job. I'm busy. She says, what are you talking about? They're busy. And he says, no, they're busy, but I'll send Sister Michael a note, and Mother Michael, and I'll see what happens. Well, now, as a result of this, she goes to church every Sunday, hoping somehow or other, right? So every Sunday she says to this priest, well, not a word. Months go by. So what she does now is she writes a story on the church, on this wonderful church who has a history of this with Francis and Clare and this order of nuns. And wouldn't you know it, the church was losing money on its last leg, and now it's filled with people because she had a conversation with this Franciscan priest, and she says, and by the way, what are they doing there? And he says, oh, they're very busy. And she says, doing what? And she said, and the priest looks at her and says, well, praying. And she says, For who looks right at her and says, you and everybody else. They are called to pray for those who will not pray for themselves. Bingo! She says, who would do such a thing with their lives? Who would go into a building, lock themselves up for the rest of their lives, and pray for others? Who would do that? And this priest said they would, and they do. And that is their calling. Calling, not job, not career, not vocation, but the fourth one, calling, the highest. I've got to talk to them. No. Okay, that's it. So she writes this article. Next thing you know, the church is flooded with people and the money starts coming and the repairs begin. She thinks that Mother Michael will say, who's the wonderful woman? But it's not coming. A year goes by. A year goes by. A year and a half goes by. Then one day she gets a note. And it says, dear, I don't remember what her name is. I would love to see you, but I'm busy. She's about ready to throw herself off a bridge. She writes back and she says, I just cannot tell you how much I think people would appreciate knowing what it is to be called. Now, had she not waited, had God not stretched her across the rack, she would have said what it's like to live in that house and da-da-da-da. But now, her whole focus is, what is a calling? What is a calling? What is it like? Did you hear God say your name? Did God say, Mary, come with this way? What was that? What was that? So, it was about 6 weeks, maybe 2 months later, she got a note. And Mother Michael said, okay. Well, that was it. She was so excited. She got all dressed up. She thought maybe this suit, maybe that suit. She actually kept rehearsing her suits, changing this one, changing that one. She shows up at the convent door. She comes in only to find out they would have to speak to them through a screen, the Carmelites. She didn't care. First one comes out. She's 90 years old. Screen opens. There's a screen. She's looking at her. She wanted to break through the screen. She wanted to say, all I want to know is, did you really hear the voice of God? What was that like? What was that? But she started out slowly, but her heart is racing like this, and she wants to say to her, I just got to know, what was it like? What was it like? And finally this nun said to her, oh, I've been in here 65 years. She's 65 years. Never walked out? No. Never left it? No. Never wanted to? No. Never saw a flower? Oh, no, I got flower pots. Huh. Ever go crazy? No. What's it like? Well, it can be difficult sometimes. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She said, why? Why? And she said, well, I was on my way to be a very famous artist, and I knew it. I knew it. She said, I was in Rome, and I had an art show, and the art was all set up, and she said, I went in there and I looked at the art show, and it was opening that night, and it was going to be good. And she said, I knew it. I knew it in me. I knew it in my heart. My heart. My heart. She said, and I left, and I decided I would go see the Vatican. She said, so I walked over there, and I went into the church, and she said, I saw the altar, and I fell on my knees, and I heard my voice. That was it. She said, I went home. I said to my family, I'm leaving. I need to go follow a higher call, and I've never come out, and I've never regretted it. And she said, to hear a calling, to hear your soul called, is a moment no one will ever understand but you. No one. What you need to think about is, can you possibly live a life where the only one who really understands the core of your life is you? We place such a major big deal about finding someone who really understands us. Why? Why? Why do you need that? Not at that level. Well, because I don't want to be lonely. You're not lonely. You're not lonely. You're surrounded by people. You're not lonely at all. Think about what you genuinely think you need. You must think about that. You must think deeply. Because a destiny requires that you shave off a whole lot of emotional, psychological, shaky little needs that cause you to live in your fate because you simply are too fragile to go down a path that requires you to hang on more to yourself than to others. A destiny requires you hang on to yourself. Fate is you hang on to others and what they have to say about your life, and your ability to be scared by others and held in authority by others. And you'll end up living a fate. An experience will happen to you. You'll look at it, and instead of having the capacity to stand back and say, well, I have to make this part of a much higher, a much bigger experience, you'll collapse under the weight of it because you'll say, that's all there is. That's it, I'm done for, that's it, that's all. Instead of having the capacity to stand back and say, this is part of a greater whole, I don't know what's going on here, this could be the best, the worst, this, that, you've got to be able to maintain your center. No matter what happens, maintain your center, maintain your center. It is exactly like a military discipline. Maintain your center and hold your center. Destiny is about looking at something and saying, I refuse to lose my soul to this. I won't do it. I will not do it. I will not lose my soul in a relationship. I will not lose my soul to a trauma. I will not do it. I absolutely will not do it. I will hold my center. There's so many times when someone has said to me, you just are not, like sympathetic. You're right, I'm not. I am absolutely not the person you want to tell your trauma to. And you want to know something? It's not because I am a tough person. I'm not at all. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. It's not because I'm not a sympathetic person. Of course I am. But that's not my agenda with you. My agenda is not to go backwards and let you whine on my shoulder. That's just not my agenda. My agenda with you is to get you to see your highest destiny and to get you to understand the difference between what it takes to live a destiny and what it takes to be controlled by your fate. And by listening to you tell me the same story you've told a million other people, I am encouraging your fate, and I won't do that. And your other friends should follow suit. And you can turn and say, you're so insensitive. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm doing exactly what other people should do to you, which is do you a favor and say, I'm not going to help you go back to the dead anymore. You live with the dead. You live with the dead, and it is enough. And I'm not going back there with you anymore. No more. And if you need to go back there, then you need to recognize you live with the dead. And it doesn't serve you, but I'm not going back there with you. And some people have had brutal, brutal childhoods, brutal experiences, brutal marriages, but you know what? They still live with the dead. And you can say, how many years do you need to get over this? Do you want 5 more precious years of your youth and your health taken by that? Would that be, I'll meet you here in 5 years. Will you feel better if you have 5 more years telling people about your death, your hideous life? Will that make you feel better? Or would transformation and 5 years of health make you feel better? Which do you think would make you feel better? Which one? And when you absolutely get down to it, what you realize is what you don't want to give up is the power that your wounds command. So it's really a power trip. And what people get angry about is, you're taking away my power. You look at him and say, yeah, well, it doesn't have any power over me, but stamina and dignity does. Say? 10 minutes. All righty. So we had narcissism, then the evolution. You evolve. From the narcissism, you move into evolution. The last stage is illumination or mysticism, which is why we're going to go into the castle. That is the 5th stage. That's the 5th stage. Your stage of awakening.